Hello, World History students. This is Unit 12, Part 2, the Chinese Civil War actually Chinese history from the Chinese Civil War to Tiananmen Square and beyond. The gentleman you see there on the left is Mao Zedong, and Mao was the longtime leader of China. Talk about him in just a second. You might remember that there was a civil war in the 1930s between communists and nationalists in China. The Chinese Civil War stopped during World War II. You know what happened with the Chinese and the Japanese in World War II. And after World War II ended, the Chinese Civil War restarted or flared up once again from 1946 to about 1949. Once again, it is a communist versus capitalist or nationalist conflict. And so the Mao is the leader of the communists, and a gentleman by the name of Chiang Kai-shek or Jiang Jiechi was the nationalist leader. And the communists were able to get the support of peasants because, communism says that they will support poor people and they will support people who are kind of at the bottom of the economy. And so peasants really like that message. The nationalists didn't have a similar message for peasantry, and so a lot of peasants went over to the communists. The nationalists were supported by the United States and the United States containment policy, which you know a little something about, trying to keep communism from flaring up, and this was certainly communism flaring up. And although the United States provided the nationalists with military supplies and so on, in the end, the support of the peasants for the communists is what wins things for the communists, and they win the Civil War in 1949. Mao then grew close to the main communist country, the USSR or the Soviet Union, by about 1950. Meanwhile, Jiang Jiechi or Chiang Kai-shek set up a United States-backed government on the island of Formosa, which became the country known as Taiwan. Mao decided to spread communism to other places, and in some ways he's doing what a lot of the old Chinese emperors did, trying to take over land. And he expanded communist control over Tibet and southern Mongolia and even parts of northeast India. And tensions grew between China and India because of this, and tensions grew between China and other countries, especially anti-communist countries like the United States, who really didn't like to see the spread of communism happening in Asia. The government that was set up by Mao was based on a philosophy called Maoism. It's like communism, but it recognizes that China has lots and lots of peasants and really not very many industrial workers or factory workers. Maoism included things like collectivizing agriculture, the same kind of thing that the Soviet Union had done in the 1930s. In other words, taking away private plots of land from farmers and having all the farmers work together. The land was then taken in China from landowners and given to peasants. But the peasants then were, over time were forced to give up control of their own plots of land and actually work together in this collectivized agriculture kind of way. Once again, the proletariat or the working class in China is not made up of factory workers like it's supposed to be under communism, but the agricultural peasantry. And so Mao wanted to do something about that over time. In 1953, as part of that plan, they launched a 5-year plan to increase industry, just trying to make more metal like steel, trying to mine more coal, to get oil, to increase the number of factories and so on. In 1958, though, it was realized that what was happening with this 5-year plan wasn't enough, and they attempted something called the Great Leap Forward. Mao realizes that there are millions and millions, tens of millions of peasants in China, and so what he wanted to do was industrialize the peasants. He ordered that they make steel, for example, and so instead of making steel in gigantic factories or steel mills, they tried to make steel sort of in their own backyards. Tens of millions of peasants, each of them making steel in their own backyard. Sounds like a great way to industrialize, except that the steel that was produced was worthless. And while the peasants were busy trying to become industrial workers, they were neglecting their farming. And so sadly, about 20 million people die from a famine that's created by this great leap forward. This very, very um, a very great disruption in Chinese society that just led to millions and millions of deaths. Mao starts to lose popularity because of this kind of thing, and in 1966 he tries to regain popularity with this thing called the Cultural Revolution. Mao is an old man, but he encouraged young people, he encouraged students to join militias called the Red Guards, and then Mao's Red Guards, or these students, were supposed to go around and be fanatically loyal to him and really do away with any of Mao's opponents, and to reestablish communist ideals and do stuff like that. And so these young people went after smart people, intellectuals, and artists, and anybody who was thought to be not really completely on board with Mao's leadership and so on. A lot of people were imprisoned. A lot of people were executed. A lot of people just sent out into agricultural lands to farm instead of doing what they had been doing before, like working as a professor or a doctor or whatever. Once again, a very disruptive period of time in Chinese history as well. But it does put Mao soundly back into power and gets rid of his enemies for a while. Mao passes away in the 1970s, and China wanted to become a more moderate kind of state. They wanted to become a state that wasn't really hated by many others around the world. And so it joins the United Nations, and it tries to improve relations with the United States. Deng Xiaoping eventually comes to power. He's the gentleman on the right there at the bottom. And he wanted to do something which would have made Mao, I think, roll in his grave. He wants to move away from communism. And so he started to allow bits and pieces of capitalism to happen. And people liked the economic success that they were getting, and they wanted more. And so 1989, a number of students and other people came together in sort of the central square of Beijing, the capital of China, a place called Tiananmen Square, and they started to protest for even more change than what Deng Xiaoping was letting them have. They wanted not just economic reform, the ability to be more capitalist, they also wanted more democracy or more democratic reforms. Deng Xiaoping decided to send in the tanks and slaughtered hundreds, if not thousands, of people at Tiananmen Square, and kind of stopped this reform movement by the people. China then adopts capitalism, or continues to move towards capitalism, with Communist Party control, and not letting any kind of democratic movements take place at all. It's really just all about people in China can do whatever they want economically, but they have to listen to their communist leadership, which is kind of strange because it's no longer a communist country. If you think about it, it's kind of a capitalist dictatorship now, with a so-called Communist Party in control. Well, that's it. A pretty quick lecture for you, but there is a reading quiz or a lecture quiz based on this. So go and do the U12P2 quiz on China, and you'll be done for the day. Thanks so much. Have a great day.